my name is Sim Xiaxi, and I'm from DBIT 2A01, and I'll be talking about how I create and populate my my OLTP database and also my data warehouse for CA1 Part 2. So this is how I created my tables. I created them in a certain sequence. I started off with creating officers, then employees, product lines, products, customers, payments, orders, and order details. I created them in this sequence because of the foreign key constraints that each table, that some tables have. So some tables are dependable on another table being on another table. Therefore, I created. For example, employees is dependable on officers because of the foreign key constraint, office code, which is the primary key of officers. So let's say if I create employees first, it will not work as it needs it needs the officers to be created first because of the office code. So the same reason goes for products to product lines, the foreign key constraint here. Payments to customers because of the foreign key constraints, and also order details to orders. So yep, this is how I create my tables. So how did I insert the data? So I inserted the data in the same sequence also, being officers being first, followed by employees, product lines, products and customers are a little different, which I'll talk about it later. Payments, orders, and finally order details. Here, order details. So I'll talk about how I populate my products table, because so basically the products table is the values of the products are here. So to be able to get the values from the add-in shell here and load it into the database, we have to first download some drivers for our PHP, which is over here. So our PHP file over here under under PHP ext, and so yeah, this is the driver which I have to download, the PHP underscore SQL SRV underscore 7, and also yep. So I have to first download those drivers, and I have to download those drivers before being able to load the PHP file here into the data. So I put the server name as my SQL server name, dbit-mb1613229 / SQL and also use the database bi underscore ca1 underscore oltp, which is the database I used to store all my oltp data. So here I linked the URL of the values here, so that I will be able to load the data into my OLTP. So yep. For the customer's part, we were given a Excel sheet, but we weren't exactly able to straight away load in the data just like that using bulk insert. This is because the address line here had initially had commas. So the SQL, because of the commas, the SQL thinks that there are two separate fields, like the address, the number, and the address here. The SQL thinks that it's two separate fields, therefore it caused an error. So what we had to do was to replace the commas with blank spaces, so that SQL will recognize this as one field for it to be a success. So yep, after doing all that, then this is how we get our so this is how we get the data from the CSV into the database. So this is how I populated all my data, After populating this, I had to populate the payments, orders and order details, because payments was um, dependable on the customers and order details dependable on orders. So yeah, I loaded them in this sequence, and yep. So here is my results. So officers, uh, employees, and product lines, etc. Payments, customers, yep, etc. Okay, so now I'll talk about how I load my how I loaded my data warehouse. So yep, hold on a second. So yeah, so this how I created my dimension table. So I created officers again first before employees, because employees is dependable on officers due to the foreign key constraint. So after I created the order dimensions, time dimensions we'll talk which is slightly different, which I'll talk a bit about it later. Product dimensions, customer dimension, and sales facts. Finally, sales facts, because I created the sales facts last because it's dependable on all the other tables due to the foreign key constraints here. So yeah, for example, the customer it is dependent on the customer dimension, the attribute which is customer number, etc., etc. So therefore it had to be created last. So how did I populate my time dimension table? So yeah, so this is how I populated them. So one thing I changed was to the date, because the data started from 2003 and ended in late 2005. So just to be sure that I get all the data from 2003 all the way to the end of 2005, I put in 2006 just to make sure, you know. And how I populated my sales facts table was like this. Inserted into sales facts the attributes of sales facts, and also then selected like all this and used inner join to connect the OLTP, the data from OLTP into the sales facts table. So the O here represents orders from the order number. CN here represents the customer dimension, and PC of the product code. And yep, my office here represent this. And yeah, this is how I populated my sales facts table. So all in all, this is how I get my results. So customer dimension, employee dimension, office dimension, order dimension, product dimension, time dimension, and also finally my sales facts dimension, like this. So one thing I learned from this CA1, the difference between a data warehouse and operational database is that an operational database removes redundancy from data containing normalized data and having high transaction performance and high data integrity, while the data warehouse has high performance of retrieval of data and contains denormalized data and high query performance. Something that the data warehouse is better than one thing that a data warehouse is better than operational database is that the data warehouse is the point of view of a business user, which is much easier to understand than operational database, which is a point of view of a technical user, which is much harder to understand for normal business users or users like us. So yep, this is the end of my video. Thank you very much.